Hi, and welcome to episode 26 of Student Voice Weekly. I'm Dr. Stuart Grey, founder of Student Voice AI. This week, I'd like to talk about academic stress. So, universities quite rightly invest in counselling, wellbeing services, and specialist student support. But a paper I read this week made me think about the pressure that starts somewhere else in the design of the course itself. I do think that higher education should be challenging. Students are there to learn difficult things, develop new ways of thinking, and do work they may not initially feel confident in doing. But the question is whether the challenge is worthwhile or whether students are spending all their energy dealing with avoidable friction around the learning itself. The study involved more than 19,000 undergraduate students across 16 Australian universities. So a great study. Around 1 in 4 students crossed the threshold for clinically relevant distress. So the researchers looked at 6 aspects of university experience, including academic stress, belonging, peer engagement, teacher support, course value, and the wider university climate. Academic stress was by far the strongest university-related distress signal for these students. On its own, it accounted for roughly a third of the variation in distress between that and the control group, which is very close to the amount explained by all 6 university experiences altogether. That does not mean academic stress caused every mental health difficulty in the study. The survey captured one point in time, and distress can also affect how somebody experiences their course, so the causality might be flipped. But I think it gives course teams a really useful question. Which parts of this pressure are designed into the student experience, and which of those could we change? So the answer might be assessment deadlines, all the bunching together, might be the volume of assessed work, unclear marking criteria, unexplained timetable changes, or students doing a difficult task without the requisite scaffolding. So those things are different from intellectual challenge. A demanding assessment can be completely reasonable if the purpose is clear, students have had a chance to practice, and the workload across the program is manageable. The same assessment can become avoidably stressful if instructions conflict, deadlines move, or every module assumes it has the only major submission that week. So the practical issue is not to make courses easy, it is to make sure students spend their effort on learning rather than trying to decode the system around the learning. The study also found weaker experiences among students with disabilities and LGBTQ students. Again, I'd be careful about jumping straight from a group difference to an explanation. A demographic label does not tell you whether the issue is workload, access, peer connection, course value, or maybe several of those things at once. That is where the comments themselves become important. It's in the free text comments that students actually tell you what is causing them stress. And in reading a relatively small number of well-categorized and organized comments, you can really make a big difference to being able to improve our learning and teaching experiences for our students. The second paper I read this week helps with that next step. So how comments turn a general signal into something a teaching team can actually use. So researchers combined more than 5,000 student evaluations of 42 teachers at a Dutch university with interviews involving 16 early career academics. The evaluation included ratings and open questions. It was intended to support teacher development over time. The average scores did not move very much across the whole group, but most of the academics interviewed said the open questions gave them new insights, and comments were often what they focused on when trying to understand the results. This makes sense to me. If a score for feedback or teaching falls slightly, the lecturer still has to guess what happened. A comment might tell them that written feedback was detailed but arrived too late, explanations were clear but the pace was too fast, or that students valued the teaching but found it difficult to ask questions. So the detail is really in those comments. Those are things you can have useful conversations about. The paper also showed why the way universities use evaluation evidence matters. Most of the academics said that they felt some tension around being evaluated. Some had constructive conversations with supervisors. Others said their results were barely discussed. So the same survey can lead to reflection or defensiveness or no action at all, depending on what happens after the data arrives. I think the useful model is to treat the score, the recurring comment themes, and the staff conversation as one big evidence package. The score shows where to look. The comments help explain what the students actually experience, and the conversation afterwards allows staff to bring in the context and agree 1 or 2 changes worth testing. That is much more useful than turning a small movement in an average into a judgment about somebody's teaching, for instance. It is also safer for staff, so students must be able to say when teaching is not working, but one hostile comment should not become the story of an entire module or an individual lecturer. You've got to look for repeated evidence and keep the route back to the comments. So we want to make sure that the purpose is development rather than evaluation and keep the stakes at a sensible level for what it actually is. So the takeaway this week is this. So we want to choose one point in a program where students report pressure, trace it back to the design decision behind it. Is the challenge necessary? Is the purpose clear? Is it avoidable? Is this some piece of friction that somebody could remove? So that's it for this week. The papers, the QA link, and the written summaries are all in Student Voice Weekly. You can subscribe at Student Voice AI if you'd like those in one place in your inbox each Friday. And if this episode was useful, please share it with somebody working in teaching, quality, student experience, or well-being. Thanks.